Now, I assume you approve of the Senate approving the $95 billion security budget last night. Do you approve of how much it was? Did we spend enough? For example, there's a giant total of 95 billion, 300 million for shipyards.
So look, it's a good step in the right direction for things that matter to America. We can all argue about the right amount, but I'm glad that it passed. It will keep America more safe, more prosperous in the years ahead. But Hugh, it's not just about the money. One of the things that has been too little discussed is great. Now we've provided these resources to our adversaries, right? Or to our allies. That's great. We should remember that our adversaries in each of those strategic areas of operations, the Chinese Communist Party, money to Taiwan, the Russians to killing Ukrainians to Ukraine, and to our Israeli allies to push back against Iran. Now we need to unleash them. Now we need to actually let them use the tools, the weapons, and the money that we've provided to win, to actually defeat our adversaries, not to just kick this can down the road. So 2 years from now, you and I are having the exact same conversation, saying, how do we use defense to deter? You have to hold your adversaries at risk. You have to hold something they value at risk. And if we don't use these resources or permit our allies to use these resources in a way that can do that, this will have done far less good than it could have.
Mr. Secretary, you have been succeeded by Tony Blinken. Secretary Blinken has not yet announced, but it is rumored that the State Department, by good leaks, is about to sanction a unit in the Israeli Defense Forces, something we have never done, to my knowledge, at any time. What is your advice to your successor on that subject of sanctioning our allies?
I hope he'll reconsider and not do what I am confident he's being told to do by the Palestinian Bureau of the State Department that sits in Israel today. I know those folks. Remember, we consolidated when we moved the embassy to Jerusalem, that particular organization that had responsibility for covering Judea and Samaria. This is a radical pro-left group of people at State Department. I hope he'll decline their recommendation to sanction an ally who is attempting to fight an adversary that killed 1,000 of its own people, and an ally that is trying to defend and defeat an adversary that's still holding Americans hostage. I pray the Americans are still alive, all the hostages. That's just insanity. Meanwhile, they had lifted the terror designation on the Houthis. This is completely backwards. It misunderstands the threat and the risk, and it equivocates morally between these two, between Iran and Israel, and that's unforgivable.
You know, Secretary Blinken, when he was abroad at NATO, made an astonishing statement that Israel risked becoming like Hamas. And I thought that was preposterous. What was your reaction to it?
Yeah, that's what I was just getting at. It's not only preposterous, it's dangerous, and dangerous not just for Israel, but for the world. When the United States doesn't understand the difference between the people of the Jewish homeland in Israel, who are doing nothing more than trying to keep their own country safe, and an Iranian regime in the form of Hamas terrorists invades their country and kills barbarically 1,000 people. When you begin to describe these two in the same moral terms, that is so inconsistent with the American tradition, and it will come back to harm us because the world will see America no longer has the moral compass to call good and evil what they are. And I saw that and was deeply disappointed and very concerned for the security of America.
The moral compass is broken, not just at the State Department. It's broken on campuses. At Columbia, most obviously, but at NYU, at Harvard, at Michigan, both of my alma maters are compromised. You went to West Point. In fact, you were first in your class at West Point. I don't think they had many sit-ins in the West Point quad, did they?
Not very many. And if you tried it, it lasted maybe 20 seconds, Hugh, something like that.
Okay. So, but you did go to Harvard Law, and Harvard Law has got some students there who've been involved in assaulting Jewish students. What do you make of the mess on the campuses? This is not 1968. This is a good versus evil fight in Israel and Gaza versus Hamas. What do you make of what's going on?
This is a little bit of the chickens coming home to roost. When you refuse to teach in your schools in America that this is an exceptional nation, when you force the 1619 Project on them, when you teach them that America is no better than other countries, that we've frankly been a problem in the world, not a solution for the good of humanity. This is what you get, Hugh. You get quasi grown-ups, kids in college, and faculty members that don't understand the difference between the freedom of speech on a campus and truly threatening behavior that has put at risk Jewish kids on campuses. And when you have a White House and a Secretary of Education that aren't prepared to do what they could do to put these things down, whether that's using security or coercion through federal funding, if you're not going to use the tools of power you have to tell these folks, this is not freedom of speech. I'm happy to have people say whatever it is on their mind, but you can't go threaten a group of students on campus and then have to close your school down, as Columbia has had to do, take classes online because you're prepared to defend basic rule of law principles. It's indecent, Hugh, and it's un-American, and I hope that we will find leaders in the years ahead that will put a stop to this.
I've got Dave McCormick coming up on the show, and I've also got the new Bloomberg poll that shows former President Trump a point ahead in Pennsylvania, 10 points ahead in places like, I think it's Nevada that he's got a 10-point lead. We have to win this election cycle. What is it going to be about? Do you think it's going to be about these trials, or is it going to be about national security?
I think it will be a little bit about each of those, but I mostly think it will be about the direction that people want to take America. Some of the issues, frankly, we've just been talking about. I was in Indiana yesterday supporting Jim Banks, who's running for the United States Senate there. I'm confident he's going to win. We need him in the United States Senate. Jim's a great conservative Reagan Republican. What I heard from people when I was there yesterday is they just watch this White House refuse to think about America in the way they know it to be, as a fundamentally decent nation, prepared to defend its borders, enforce the rule of law, not to drive costs higher by making silly statements abroad that cause multiple wars to break out. I think those are the things. Basic competence and leadership in the White House is what I think this election will turn on in the presidential race and in these Senate races, including in the race in Pennsylvania. Dave McCormick, my 40-year friends, we were cadets at the same time at West Point a long time ago, Hugh, and we need people like Dave in the Senate too.
I will ask him about that. Now, every day the former president comes out and he gets like 3 minutes and he hits the prosecution. And today the New York Times has an op-ed blasting the prosecution. You're a pretty good lawyer at one time, Harvard lawyer. This is an out-of-bounds prosecution. This is a political show trial. Do you think it's helping the former president? Because he can't campaign at the same time everyone realizes, I think everyone who's in the middle realizes, this is an absurd prosecution.
It's definitely the case that reasonable people all concede that this is a political stunt that, frankly, the whole world is watching. You. I've been traveling. I was in the Middle East and in Asia. The whole world's watching, saying, what the heck is going on in the United States where you're prosecuting the president for this garbage? So I think people can see that. Look, it may help marginally when it comes time for people to go to the voting booth. I don't frankly know the answer to that for sure, but it's unfair to not let the Republican candidate for the presidency go campaign and compete and tell his story to the American people about why he ought to be the president of the United States again. It is so unfair, so indecent, and so dangerous for our republic when we've now had a party resort to having their political leaders put on trial a candidate for president of the United States.
Last question, since you've been abroad. Do people abroad notice that President Biden is infirm? Because he is absolutely infirm, and it's impossible to hide it. The vice president is simply not competent. Her numbers are even worse than the president's. But do the people abroad notice both those things, that the president is infirm and the vice president is incompetent?
Of course they do. It's readily apparent to them. A year ago, maybe Hugh, maybe a year and a half ago, it was whispered. Right. They would mention it. They'd say it in a small circle. Now it's common knowledge. It's spoken about relatively openly that the United States president and the person who's a heartbeat away from the presidency are not prepared to actually engage, converse, argue, to listen, to actually address the global challenges that are upon the world today. They're watching this world come unglued. They see the United States incapable of holding it together, and they are frightened not only for our country and what it has done for them throughout these years, but they're frightened for their own country because they all know that American leadership matters, and when it is absent, their people are in danger as well.
30 seconds, Mr. Secretary. Do you think President Biden is making the choices that Secretary Blinken is announcing, or is it Secretary Blinken and Jake Sullivan basically running, along with the Chief of Staff, as triumvirs, the national security policy of the United States?
I think President Biden has blessed every decision that is made. I'm sure these recommendations are coming to him. And I think that President Biden needs to own every one of these decisions. He's the commander in chief. They are his.